Good evening. Thank you so much for coming here on this Good Friday. I'm so glad to see all of you and welcome those of you who are joining us online. We are pleased to be here. This is a wonderful way to begin the last 3 days of our Holy Week, and I'm so glad you joined us. I hope that you will consider coming tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for our Holy Saturday experience. It is not a traditional worship service like this. Instead, we'll be out in the prayer garden. Should be good weather, and I hope that you will find it a meaningful experience. And then we will have our Easter Sunday morning services, sunrise at 7 a.m. at Morton Chapel on their front porch. And then we'll have kids' activities and Easter egg hunt here at about 9:15. And then our regular 10:30 time, we will have a wonderful Easter celebration. So I hope to see you all there. Would you join me as we go to God in prayer? Oh God, sometimes we wonder why we call this Good Friday. Why do we gather to remember something terrible, the worst? Then we remember that it is you alone who are good. You have created and called this world good. And while there is plenty to call bad, we need only to look around us to see that things are clearly not how you created them to be. We are here because despite all the damage we've done to your beautiful creation, the harm we've caused and the violence we've witnessed, you have chosen to redeem it. You've absorbed the bad and transformed it into good. So we meet this evening in your presence to witness to the violence in our world, to refuse to look away from suffering, and to stand stubbornly in the hope that even this is not too much for you to transform into good. Amen. Would you join me as we read responsively this call to worship? Come, let us gather again in the shadow of the cross of Christ.
We gather to remember the overwhelming evidence of love's ultimate sacrifice.
Who would have guessed that the height and depth, the length and width of God's love might look like this, a forsaken Savior on a cross?
Certainly not us who are too often lost amid the world's distractions and responsibilities, not us for whom such love was offered without cost.
Let us gather again in the shadow of the cross of Christ and commit ourselves to remember the price paid. Let us live our lives in a way that indicates why this Friday is called good.
Thanks be to God who opened the gates of heaven that we might have the faith, hope, and love witness in Christ's sacrifice for our salvation.
Crucified my Lord. Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, "Pray that you won't give in to temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. He said, "Father, if it's your will, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then an heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish, and he prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like the drops of blood falling on the ground. When he got up from praying, he went to the disciples. He found them asleep, overcome by grief. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you won't give in to temptation." While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the human one with a kiss?" When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we fight them with our swords?" One of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. Jesus responded, "Stop, no more of this." He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and the others who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a thief? Day after day I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time when the darkness rules."
Then the company of soldiers, the commander, and the guards from the Jewish leaders took Jesus into custody. They bound him and led him first to Annas. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it was better for one person to die for the people.
Peter followed them at a distance. When they lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter was among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I'm not." An hour or so later, someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him, because he's a Galilean too." Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned, looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the Lord's words, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and cried uncontrollably.
Meanwhile, the chief priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered, "I've spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews gather. I've said nothing in private. Why ask me? Ask those who heard what I told them. They know what I said." After Jesus spoke, one of the guards standing there slapped Jesus in the face. "Is that how you would answer the high priest?" he asked. Jesus replied, "If I speak wrongly, testify about what was wrong. But if I speak correctly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people reached a decision to have Jesus put to death. They bound him, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate, the governor.
When Judas, who betrayed Jesus, saw that Jesus was condemned to die, he felt deep regret. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders and said, "I did wrong because I betrayed an innocent man." But they said, "What is that to us? That's your problem." Judas threw the silver pieces into the temple and left. Then he went and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the silver pieces and said, "According to the law, it's not right to put this money in the treasury. Since it was used to pay for someone's life, it's unclean." So they decided to use it to buy the potter's field, where strangers could be buried. That's why that field is called Field of Blood to this very day. This fulfilled the words of Jeremiah the prophet, "And I took the 30 pieces of silver, the price for the one whose price had been set by some of the Israelites, and I gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord had commanded me."
Pilate went back into the palace. He summoned Jesus and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others spoken to you about me?" Pilate responded, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your nation and its chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus replied, My kingdom doesn't originate from this world. If it did, my guards would fight so that I wouldn't have been arrested by the Jewish leaders. My kingdom isn't from here." "So you are a king," Pilate said. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. I was born and came into the world for this reason, to testify to the truth. Whoever accepts the truth listens to my voice." "What is truth?" Pilate asked.
It was customary during the festival for the governor to release to the crowd one prisoner, whomever they might choose. At that time, there was a well-known prisoner named Jesus Barabbas. When the crowd had come together, Pilate asked them, "Whom would you like me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus who is called Christ?" He knew that the leaders of the people had handed him over because of jealousy. While he was serving as judge, his wife sent this message to him: "Leave that righteous man alone. I've suffered much today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and kill Jesus. The governor said, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" "Barabbas," they replied. Pilate said, "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." But he said, "Why? What wrong has he done?" They shouted even louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere and that a riot was starting. So he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I'm innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It's your problem."
Then he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed over to be crucified. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's house, and they gathered a whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a red military coat on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Then they put a stick in his right hand, and they bowed down in front of him and mocked him, saying, "Hey, King of the Jews." After they spit on him, they took the stick and struck his head again and again. When they had finished mocking him, they stripped him of the military coat and put his own clothes back on him. They led him away to crucify him.
As they were going out, they found Simon, a man from Cyrene. They forced him to carry his cross. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which means skull place, they gave Jesus wine mixed with vinegar to drink. But after tasting it, he didn't want to drink it. After they crucified him, they divided up his clothes among them by drawing lots. They sat there guarding him. They placed above his head the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." And it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Therefore the Jewish priests complained to Pilate, "Don't write, 'The King of the Jews,' but 'This man said, I'm the King of the Jews.'"
The people were standing around watching, but the leader sneered at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself, if he's really the Christ sent from God, the chosen one." One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man did nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise."
When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
When some of the bystanders saw it and heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, and put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come and take him down."
Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. And the rocks were split.